Good morning, Jamila. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
Yeah, really good, really good. I've got a sunny afternoon here in London and got a sunny morning in Baltimore by the looks of it as well. So
Oh, yes. So happy about that.
good start for the day. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining the series of Sentientist Conversations. And we've talked briefly before, but I guess it's a series of conversations around what I think are the two deepest and most important philosophical questions. What's real? How should we understand the universe? And what matters morally? And I've got an obvious bias because I'm framing those questions in the context of this very simple worldview called sentientism, which suggests that when it comes to thinking about what's real, we should use evidence and reason and take a naturalistic approach. When it comes to morals and ethics, we should care about all beings that are sentient, that have the capacity to suffer. But one of the fun things about these conversations is I'm talking to people who agree and disagree with that philosophy. So it'll be fascinating to understand your personal journey so far. But
Mhm.
before we get to those two deep questions, how would you best introduce yourself and your work?
Well, I'm once again Jamila Alfred, but I like to call myself Jamila Anahata online. I would say I'm the marketing director for AfroVegan Society, and I'm also a content creator for the Soulful Veganista, which is my own brand. And basically, the core and root of my work is we'll get to that more, but it's just to it's very community based. I'm very somebody who likes to reach out to community, engage with my communities, and to create a just future because of that. Just find solutions of how we can alleviate horrible symptoms of oppression in my communities. So whatever I can do to find resources, information, or just even connection, personal connection, any way to best help my and serve my community in certain ways will do. And that usually is through the lens of veganism, racial justice, food justice, climate justice, basically all the isms and justices that I like to do. So I can go on and on about that, but my work is very rooted within what way I do with Afro-Vegan Society, which talks about veganism through a Black lens on top of other forms of oppression. So I would say I would stick to that for now,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
but that's great. Fighting all the bad isms, pushing all the good isms, and helping people to connect and come together in community and doing that. Yeah, no, it sounds great. Thank you.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the reasons that it's great to talk to you because I get a sense that there's some quite strong philosophical underpinnings that drive your work. So it'd be great to
Oh
explore
yeah.
those. And the first of those is this: what's real? Question. So for some of my guests, it's a story about whether they originally grew up in a religious, a supernatural, or more spiritual context, or one that was quite naturalistic or atheistic or agnostic, and how that way of thinking has shifted over time, if it has. Many of my guests have gone one way or the other. There's probably a bias towards people who started out supernatural and are now, like me, naturalistic. But yeah, it's a fascinating story that it's a privilege to hear. So you can wind the clock back as far as you like.
Awesome. Okay, well, where do I even start? Okay. So I'm from Maryland. I'm in the US, and where I'm from and where my parents are originally pretty Southern. My dad was raised in the DC area, and my mom was raised in North Carolina, very Southern, almost Bible Beltish.
Yeah.
And so I was raised very Southern Baptist because that is a way. I'll probably get to that in a second, but I do want to actually touch on this for a second. I used to down religion and Christianity and things like that. People believe what they want to believe. I cannot. I realized I had to come to a place where I can't judge people for that, regardless of how I saw that industry.
Yeah.
But how I see my religious background back in the day, going to church every Sunday, going to Bible study, like eating dinner after, at the Sunday service, just the certain morals we had in the household. Although I didn't agree with those, I see that as a really great form of community. At the time, I might not have agreed with everything that I believed in, that my parents wanted me to believe in at the time. But looking back, instead of seeing it like, oh, I was brainwashed, what was I thinking? I was a child,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
choose that type of thing. But now I see it as, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to be with my community, other Black people, basically just throwing our pain at the altar. Church was more than just believing in something that we couldn't see. Church was more of people, namely Black people, Black Southern people, coming from places of work where they knew that they were probably talked down to, coming from, just walking down the street and somebody probably giving them a nasty look, or people giving them, racism goes deeper than just like certain biases. Like people treat you a certain type of way. So in going back, I'm seeing how, maybe I might not have agreed with those things, but that was a great way for people to just surrender to something that they couldn't see, really. Surrender to just trusting that regardless of what they've been going through on the physical realm, that there has to be something more. There's more than to life than this suffering. So I would say, yeah, I was definitely very religious growing up. Even up until high school, I went to like Bible classes and I had like youth group. And even though I was always a gothy kid, I've always been the punk kid.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
I
doesn't
didn't
necessarily fit with the sort of Baptist ethos.
exactly at all. So even within that community and like growing up and like as a teenager, I kind of seemed a little like, sterile and not as fun, maybe sometimes conservative about things. But it did give me a moral compass growing up and made me not want to like go out and party when I did not knocking anyone who does, but it just made me feel like I had a little bit of structure. But growing up, especially after I went vegan, I won't lie, pretty much 3 seconds after I went vegan, I decided that I was just not going to be Christian anymore. And
That's interesting timing. Was that just a random link, or was there something going on in your head that made them both happen at the same time?
I feel like veganism, being vegan, learning about veganism, doing all my research and just really connecting with it on different levels made me feel like, you know what, if I can open my mind about this, something that I didn't consider like a year ago. I've always had vegetarian friends growing up. Like it was not like off or odd to me. But after I went vegan, I was like, look, if someone like me will stop eating animal products, non-human animal products, I am going to like, I can do anything. I can reach that deep down and learn more about anything and not try to tie my worth so hard to an ideology that I can't change my worldview, especially when I receive new information. So at that
it's sort
point,
of freeing.
Exactly, it was so liberating for me because it was at a point where somebody who's very opinionated, I'm a very opinionated person. I was like, you know what, my opinions can change, my worldview can change when I receive new information, and that's okay. That doesn't make me a bad person. It just means that I am changing and growing. And so now I see things like that as an opportunity for growth rather than like, look, you're not going to change my opinion. So yeah, veganism really helped me see that like I can think about things beyond religion and more of a spiritual sense.
Yeah, makes sense. And there's something in the zeitgeist at the moment that people, I guess, understandably, are so frustrated with polarization and tribalism that there's almost this sense that no one ever changes their mind about anything. And that's one of the things I love about this series of conversations, because my guests, and I don't want to be rude to you, but I think they're all quite weird, right? Because they've almost all of them have changed their mind on some really, really big, seriously important topics that sometimes comes with some social challenges as well. So yeah, I take a lot of heart from these conversations that even pretty strident, willful people can still change their minds. So,
absolutely, I feel you on that.
So on that, and on the I guess the religious side of it, when you decided you weren't a Christian, what were the things driving that? Because in my guess, there's been a mix. Some people it's more about evidence and reason. So they've sort of maybe found the inconsistencies in the Bible, or they've learned about other religions or non-religious worldviews and gone, hold on, this doesn't make sense. Or they were maybe taught young earth creationism, then they find out about evolution. So there's much more sort of facts and evidence and reason and logic, and therefore this just doesn't seem right. With other people, it's more on the morality and the ethics side. So they're more saying, well, I like the universal compassion stuff and I like the sense of community, but there are some interpretations of this religious worldview that seem to be leading to anti-Semitism or racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever it is, right? And they're like, or even if it's just threatening children with burning in hell for eternity if they don't follow the rules, right? Which billions of people think is normal and I think is deeply awful. So without going on a rant, there's a sort of sometimes one, sometimes the other, sometimes a mix of two. It's like either an ethical thing or an evidence thing that pulls people away from a religious way of thinking. Was it one or both or something else?
Oh my God, that is such a good question, because to tell you the truth, I think I was 21 when I went vegan. And I've always been like I don't want to say rebel without a cause, but I've always been someone that like would speak up about something that was like going on at the time. So I think it was more me, I don't want to say hopping on a bandwagon, but I mean, when you're 21 and you're learning about religion and you're learning about yourself and all the isms in the world, you're kind of like, you know what? If I can be vegan and I can dye my hair blue, then I can be an atheist or something like that. Like that
Yeah,
was kind of like my mentality at the time. I think it was more of me wanting to be a little bit different also.
yeah. They're
Um,
sort of pushing back a bit of rebellion. Just
right, right. And that comes naturally for me because my dad is pretty much like a natural activist. He's just somebody that's always been into like, he reminds me of like Malcolm X in a lot of way. If you were able to mobilize in that way. But like I've always been raised to believe certain things about being Black, knowing that I'm a femme, stuff, things like that. So
yeah,
I just really feel like it came from me wanting to just rebel. But then after a while, it was about me doing my research about, the church in general, the history of the church, dating back to like, not even just like the 1900s, but all the hundreds, all the
oh
centuries.
yeah. There's quite some
And
stories in there.
oh, yes. And I was like, oh, do I want to be a part of that industry? It just kind of similar to how I went vegan. Like, basically, me going vegan was a decision that I do not want to support this industry that is terrorizing, abusing, and like killing, you know what I mean? Just being horrible towards non-human animals. So I was like, look, now that I know like what the church really is, because I feel like I've been coddled into learning more about that in my childhood. I feel like my parents wanted to like skirt away from those facts because they just wanted me to be so straight laced or whatever they envisioned for me.
Yeah,
So it was definitely a mix of both. It was definitely me like just seeing that like spirituality didn't have to come from religion, especially since I'm somebody who, we'll probably talk more about this, but I'm somebody who's very spiritual. I'm somebody who has always had some sort of like, not my empathy. Have you ever seen Hannibal Lecter at all? I know this sounds off topic, but do you know Will Graham from Hannibal Lecter? He
well,
was a
I know the stories, and I've seen a couple of the films.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
So to those who are into Hannibal Lecter out there, I'm a horror fan. He was working with someone named Will Graham, and Will Graham is a detective as well, and he had a lot of empathy. His gift was that he had so much empathy that he was able to chase that empathetic urge he had to solve a crime, to solve a murder.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm like Will Graham, but just like Will Graham, I have a lot of empathy. And that empathy is like a compass for how I do certain things and how I feel certain things. So because of that, there's times where I feel certain energies around me, all those types of things. And I felt that ever since I was a child. Once I realized I didn't have to have religion in order to possibly practice these abilities or hone in on these abilities or just to have compassion, I decided that it just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I can have ethics, morals on my own. I don't need religion to do that for me. And because of that, I created my own moral compass, and it's got me to where I am now. And I'm not even mad. I mean, I didn't need anything for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, I like it. And and the paths people follow are interesting because quite a few people, once they've moved away from a religious worldview, some people have quite an easy path. I did, partly because religion wasn't a really serious part of our life. So moving away from it was quite gradual. Other people have had a real challenge because it was so deeply important to the society. Some of them actually took some real risks, not just social risks, but physical risks in leaving as well. So there's a variety of different ways of leaving. But some people, once they've left, and you hinted at this earlier, will be quite, go through a stage of being quite anti-religion, where you sort of bash it all or ridicule it and challenge it. But quite a few people then find a more moderate way through, where they can still be quite strident about the problems in religion. The discriminations, the arbitrary stuff, the fact that some of them can feel, as you've said, like an industry. Right? There's some
Yes.
pretty egregious examples out there of people using a religious or even spiritual way of talking to basically scam money off vast numbers of vulnerable people to buy jets and gold plate their toilets and stuff. So
Literally.
there's those challenges, but I like the way you put it, because I think it's really important not to throw everything out, because there's so much power and goodness in many religious supernatural worldviews as well. And you've already talked about the importance of community. We've talked about the importance of compassion and empathy. And yeah, I think you and I follow different paths after leaving religion, but I think both of us would say, look, you can have those things without needing a religious mindset. And whether you take a sort of more classically naturalistic way of thinking, or you take a more spiritual path, there are other ways of keeping the good stuff without
Yeah.
being, tied up with the bad stuff. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we don't have to do, you know what I mean? I'm once again not saying that that's how you find morals, great, but we really have to seek within ourselves a lot of the time what
Yeah.
we hold dear and what we value, and then act on it. We don't necessarily need a religion to do that. So I definitely feel you on
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And we'll come on to that question about, what is your morality next?
Mhm.
But I'm interested in where you went next on the journey, because you've already talked about being quite a spiritual person. I know that's, important in your work. Your personal brand is the Soulful Veganista. So as you moved away from that sort of formal religious institutional worldview, how would you describe your thinking about spirituality and the nature of the world and the nature of reality, and how does all that stuff play in together? Because just to set up maybe a contrast, I guess I followed a more boring classical route of, generic background, Christianity, atheism, and then I layered on initially a sort of humanistic ethic and then a sentientist ethic on top of that. But I've still remained pretty hard-edged naturalistic, right? So you might describe me as an extreme agnostic, but basically atheist. And I don't hold any beliefs in, magic, spiritual stuff that I, can't see fairly hard-edged evidence in as well.
Right.
So that's one path that some of my guests have followed, but I think you followed a different one. So it'd be interesting to know how you describe spirituality and the soul and some of these other things that fit around your worldview.
Right. Absolutely. So I'm trying to figure out, because I feel like it's so not streamlined for me. And of course, nothing's linear, but it's
Yeah,
just like
and it doesn't have to
there's
be.
just so
Yeah,
many weird ups and downs with it. So I would say when it comes to spirituality, it might be something that we most likely cannot see. And it can possibly, there are things that can be studied, as well.
yeah,
But if I could describe it at all, or describe my connection to it, it was just learning the connection that I had, not only with other humans, other non-human animals, like to the grass, the trees, the chair. It just felt like finally I can see the connection. I can feel the connection between me and other sentient beings.
yeah,
It's not just me. You know what I mean? It was just me realizing that the world, even though I live in my own world, we all live in our own world, you know what I mean, holistically in our heads. But it was just that there is more to life than my own suffering or flourishing. There's more to life than what I'm going through. There's more to life. Even though everyone looks different, we all have different cultures, religions, languages. We're only that different because of our regions. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
we created all these isms and castes and hierarchies based off of our region, our financial status, and that's old. That's nothing new. But I that in that journey, I swiped away all the titles that I gave myself, being a sister, a daughter, a friend, at the time like a cashier, or a college student. All those things, I was like, who am I outside of all the titles that I have given myself and my peers, my family members, society? And once I came to that conclusion, of course, with Eckhart Tolle, I feel like a lot of people with the power of now that help people realize things like that. And luckily, with my current my current partner now, he's really into spirituality and things like that, and was able to give me more text to read from so I could organize my thoughts about it, like the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, things like that, where it just helped me see that the cause of my suffering outside of isms, you know what I mean? Being a Black femme in the world can be
yeah,
hard, especially being queer. But I realized that even with those isms and everything that I experienced, like there is a life outside of that. And even though people see me as a certain way, they prejudge me because of what they've been taught, what they've been conditioned to believe. I am not what they think I am. I am somebody who's connected to spirit. I'm connected to my ancestors, my spiritual team. Like I am divinely guided. And that might sound like a lot of Christian talk,
yeah,
but if Christianity, or at least with my family, Southern Baptist, if they were to wipe away all the oppression within that community and all the things that they've been conditioned to believe, from our history of enslavement in the US, because that was something that we held so dear onto, and
yeah,
I can't blame them. But if we wiped away all the oppressive things from Christianity, that's where we would be left with, is that there's just more outside of me. I don't have to be individualistic. I can see the connection between people. I can help people, not because it'll probably give me a paycheck or attention on the internet, but because you are another living, breathing being on this planet, regardless of what you think of me, I want to help you because you deserve to be alive and flourish, just like I deserve to be alive and flourish. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense, because that's kind of like was my thought process along my journey, not necessarily to spirituality, but to understanding the connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think one of the things that I find surprising is that even though I have quite a strongly, naturalistic way of thinking, evidence and reason, it can feel quite clinical. It can feel, very scientific. It can feel as if, I don't believe anything until there's been 6 randomized controlled trials and, loads of scientists have poured over it in white lab coats. And that's not really what I mean by naturalism, right? That's part of it. But I think of naturalism in a much broader sense. One that I think of, there's many different types of evidence, right? There's scientific evidence, but there's also my own personal experience. I'm confident this coffee mug exists, and I don't need a scientist to tell me, right? So there's some, our personal experiences matter too. They can be warped, they can be misled, of course, but that's still experience. So if you broaden out the definition of what you mean by evidence, and you have an open mind, and you also add in something else that's forgotten, I think, by some people in a atheistic or scientific mindset, is humility, which needs to be at the heart of a naturalistic way of understanding, right? The whole point of it is we don't really know. We're evolved apes imperfectly gathering evidence. Let's just try and work it out as we go along, but there could always be new evidence. There could always be new stuff. So you need that humility as well. And I think when you take that sort of maybe softer view of naturalism, you can actually find more overlap with a spiritual way of thinking than you might find, because while I think you might describe your sense of connectedness and meaning in a spiritual way, I might see that connectedness both in terms of just the reality of physics, we are all stardust and everything is linked, but also the webs of relations that we have, in this modern world across different beings, right? There's loads of different ways of connected. So I think there's even within, a spiritual way of thinking or a naturalistic way of thinking, there can still be quite a lot of touch points and overlaps. And again, I like the way you framed. It's almost as if you took, the religious world you grew up with, stripped out the extraneous stuff or the stuff that was maybe inappropriate or you just didn't need anymore, and kept the good stuff. It's a nice way of framing.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And would you say this naturalism thing, again, and I'm only a pretend philosopher, so I'll probably use the terms wrong, but there's one way of thinking about naturalism, which is only the natural world exists. So that says, look, there's no supernatural, there's no spirits, there's no magic, there's no deities, just the natural world exists. So that's one type of naturalism. There's another one, which again is softer, which says, look, we can never know, really. It's, even for me, it's conceivable that supernatural stuff might exist. I just choose not to believe in it if I haven't seen any evidence. But it's more a methodological naturalism, which says, look, I'm open-minded about whether supernatural stuff could exist, but I will only believe in things for which I think there's evidence and reason. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting. It's an interesting question to ask both spiritual people and religious people, because some will say, look, my faith or my spirituality is based on evidence and reason because I have evidence from my own personal experiences or the things I see, so it is a logical decision to believe in the things I believe. And for other people, it is a faith separate from evidence and reason. It's saying, look, here's evidence and reason over here. I'll use that in my daily life. But when it comes to these things, I don't need evidence and reason. It's faith. That's a separate choice. How would you describe your spirituality? Is it something you think you've come to through evidence and reason and a sort of more technical process? Or is it something you sense independent from that way of thinking?
I love this question, because even though if I answer it awkwardly and around the question, I'm going to say this anyway, because you just helped me realize right now that I've come to a conclusion. I'm almost 30. You know what I mean? I'm 29. I'm so excited to turn 30 next year. And in that notion, I kind of got more into it, like a naturalistic, like more, I don't want to say skeptical, because once again, I'm spiritual. So I believe that especially when I do my divination work, like I do tarot cards, I'm very intuitive. I believe that I can channel information, not necessarily from like, I wouldn't want to say God or anything. It's more like I feel like I receive intuitive messages from my spiritual team, which can be my ancestors, my guides, my angels, all those types of things. But at the same time, though, I'm very much so skeptical. I feel like that if I were to be in a ghost hunting team, like a paranormal team, I'd be
Yeah.
like the skeptic of the group, because not
Yeah.
necessarily because I don't believe, because I believe that there's certain things that we can't explain, like what you mentioned earlier. I believe very heavily in science, but I also believe in that there just cannot be all there is on this earth or on this plane. Like,
Yeah.
there are so many dimensions that exist. There's so many, and I will never be able to measure that. I'll never be able to do a formula of that. I just know that there are just things outside of this earth. So, but within that, a few years ago, I will say, in my journey of spirituality, I was that faith-based person where it was just no, like, science was the enemy. And that's something that kind of
Yeah.
is happening today. I won't go into detail, but you know
Oh,
what I'm
yes.
talking about. So being vegan and then also getting into spirituality, which included yoga and like all those types of things, I felt like I was being such a typical hippie, and that's cute when you're in your early 20s. Look, I'm not knocking everybody. Everyone has to learn in their own way. But how I had to learn about that mindset, just completely being with the flow and like just just not caring about the physical aspects of the earth and science, I had to overcome that real quick. And I really think this pandemic helped me, because I learned that medicine is okay. I learned that, uh, it is okay to listen to a doctor. It is okay to, because there are so many people you don't trust
Yeah.
based on the information you're given. But those types of conspiracy theories just kind of get you further and further into a hole that you cannot get yourself out of. And it makes you not trust people who care more about numbers and science. And when I strip that away, once again, when I realized that believing in science and what I can see, what I can feel, what's tangible, what can be measured, that doesn't make me less of a spiritual person,
Yeah.
because I do live on this earth and I don't live in the spiritual plane. You know what I mean? Planes exist at once. You know what I mean? How can I say? But like, I'm here at this moment. So I have to put a lot of stake in what I see, because that is what I can do. So I would say that I'm really very much so mixed at this stage of my life when it comes to my spiritual journey. Because yes, of course, I do my tarot cards. I believe in spirituality. I have an ancestor altar. You could probably see my background. I'm into candle. I'm into all that type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, I realized that just being so faith-based in things, because I trust that I'll wake up tomorrow morning. I trust that I will always chase my dreams. I trust that things will go well for me all the time. I'll always grow. I'm kind of affirming and confirming at the same
Yeah.
time. Um, but realistically, I don't want to put too much stake in things I can't see. I don't. I want to be here on this earth. I don't want to escape into other realms, because I don't like my experience in the physical world. So I like to blend both together
Yeah.
and not waver too far over, even though I am very spiritually centered. Just because I'm somebody that I can be so far on the spectrum with things, and I found it to not be very healthy. So I always try to find a sweet spot in the spectrum where I could healthfully balance or have a rhythm with those certain things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And it almost feels like you're saying you sense there are other realms and other things out there that we'll probably never understand, but you feel a connection to them and that they're real. But within this world where we are and you are, it runs on physical laws. You take a naturalistic approach. You're sort of, more grounded,
Yes.
in this world we inhabit together. So yeah, it's an interesting balance. And I one of the challenges I find is we've already talked about some of the ethical risks of a religious worldview, but they're present in spirituality, and they're present in any sort of non-naturalistic way of thinking where people believe things maybe where there isn't a strong basis of evidence. And whether that's QAnon, or whether it's anti-vaxx, or whether it's we're not just talking about religion and spirituality here. So on the one hand, obviously there's many good things that can flow through those. People get a sense of meaning and connectedness from some aspects of spirituality or supernatural thinking, but then there are areas where that style of thinking can warp compassionate ethics and cause, dangerous things to happen. And I wonder if the way you've described that is a way of defending against that risk, because you're saying, look, in this world we are in today, take a naturalistic approach, right? We're not going to let that other style of thinking warp our compassion for the things we share this world with. Is that a fair way of explaining how you sort of defend against some sort of warping? Because I think, how can I put it this way? There's a few risks from supernatural religious thinking in terms of how they impact on ethics. One can be arbitrary rules. One can be that they talk about universal compassion, but actually it's constrained or conditional. You'll only get to heaven if you follow these rules, or if you're in our in-tribe, anyone outside can burn. But there's also something about putting something as being more important than other sentient beings. So in a classical sense, that might be a deity or a church institution, but it doesn't have to be religious, right? It could be a spiritual guru. It could be a national leader. It could be, I won't name any names, but we have some interesting recent experience. We still have some in this country where, the national leader puts themselves, and as soon as you put anything as more important than the suffering and flourishing living life and death of other sentient beings, you tend to get a lot of suffering and death. So there's a bunch of different reasons why I'm nervous about, a supernatural worldview, because of their impact on ethics. But many people manage to avoid those risks. Sorry, I've just gone on a long rant now, but
no, I love it, because you also kind of, I will say this, a lot of the conspiracy theories I used to believe in a long time ago, like 6 or 7 years ago, kind of were QAnon-y. And I will be honest about that, because in seeing what these people believe now, I understand that it is very harsh social conditioning, especially when you feel so lost and when you feel so, how can I explain? When you feel so like you've given up, like everyone's lying to me, the government's lying to me, like my employer's lying to me, what's going on? When you come to that conclusion and you're just so angry and fed up with being angry and fed up, especially as somebody who was raised lower middle class. I was not rich at all growing up. So I feel like that has a lot to do with class too, because when you're poor and you're not even like necessarily hungry, because I had food on the table, but when your needs are not going to always be met, and you know that you have to be inconvenienced a lot in order to receive any type of respect or resources, it makes you angry, and it makes you turn to these conspiracy theories because it justifies that anger. It's like, oh, that's why this is happening to me. They're lying, and they're eating babies, all those types of things. We people go to that. They go to that because they just want an answer.
And because understandably, you've just lost trust in the institutions that are supposed to be helping you, right? So it's so tempting to have a story, a simple story that ties it all together with a goodie and a baddie, and there's the answer. Yeah.
Exactly. But on the other hand of that, it is so violent, and it's violent towards others. It's violence towards yourself, because you're sitting here trying to rack your brain about all the things, all the conspiracy theories, and you're trying to pin them all together and like trying to create some sort of path or a pattern. And it just, it takes you down like a really dark path, just so you can go reach an answer that we'll never have. Yeah. We'll never receive the answer to that. And just like what you were saying, when you really dig deep in those conspiracy theories, it at the end of it is usually a religious center. It's usually somebody trying to push the fact that we need to all be Christian to combat the evil forces of the government, because the government are Satan worshipers and blah, blah, blah. But even that thinking is just not the point. You know what I mean? It's not the point. And the point here is just that, just like what you're saying, like, and what I'm getting to is just that going too far on those spectrums, it is okay to have the whole entire broad spectrum of a certain field or a certain subject. And of course, picking and choosing what serves our ideologies, of course. However, we need to be real. What is going to help my community and me at the same time, realistically? What can I do now, rather than, once again, going to a higher being and, trying to let them give me the answer? Because realistically, with those people, when it comes down to usually Christianity, not knocking anybody, but what can God really do? Like, what can God really do when we pray so hard and we use our Bibles and things like that? What can we do now? What can we do as people on this planet now to make sure that we are fostering like health, wellness and just compassion within our communities. What can we do? Because we can't keep reaching out to God to try to save us, because that has never happened. No one can save us but ourselves.
And
so,
I'd suggest that if you read most of the religious books, the God that's described there isn't really that compassionate either. So I'm not sure the prayers would work that well, even if he or she is there. So
exactly. So I understand that us as humans, we want to find meaning. We want to because I was learning about this a couple of weeks ago about how, like, what religion, how did religion really come about? And I came to the conclusion based on my own research that a lot of people, in the olden times, once they became conscious of their death, once they became conscious that they could die at any moment, they had to like find a way to make life seem meaningful, that their 15 to 60 years on the planet is not in vain. So I feel like when we go back to that, when we realize that religion all really came from, and even when it comes to the QAnon, all those type of conspiracy theories, it all comes from like somebody wanting to seek answers because they feel lost.
Yeah.
And rather than seeking it from within, not everyone understands that consciousness type talk. I understand that, we all have our own journey. But when you don't listen to your own intuition, your own moral compass, how you are intuitively guided, we're going to want to listen to somebody else, a higher power. That doesn't even necessarily mean God. That could be like government, political leaders. We want to listen to that person because they're probably speaking straight to us, because they probably know the psychology of how to talk to people who are, misled easily. But yeah, I just really feel like internal work is like very core to finding our own morals and ethics. And once we keep seeking outside of ourselves, whether it be a peer, a religious figure, a political figure, we're going to always be lost, because it's not coming from us. It's coming from what people are telling us it means to be human. So that's pretty much, I feel like I said everything I had to say on that. But
no, that's great. Thank you. And it's a tricky balance, because I think you're right. Some of that religious or even the conspiracy theory drive is driven through a sort of sense of powerlessness or paranoia, or a sense of wanting to submit, to give ourselves over to, you almost give up, right? And I think that's a shame, right? You can understand why, but it's a shame. It's almost a negative side. But the flip side of that is almost a human exceptionalism or a human arrogance, where we say, look, I feel just so wonderfully special and unique that I cannot believe the universe is not here just for me, right? So, it's impossible for me to conceive of anything going on after my death, because I'm so important that surely something has to continue, right? So there's almost this weird mix of paranoia and human arrogance that means that we're always driving to put ourselves at the center and frame everything as if it's, about us. And we're pretty amazing, but, we're not that amazing.
Right? Yeah. Well, I always think about that, like anthropocentrism, like what, like why, and I understand that we have a different form of consciousness than non-human animals sometimes. Like we were able to look in the mirror and recognize ourselves a lot of the time. We're able to, and everyone has different varying degrees of that. But just because we have, I don't even want to say, what is a higher consciousness? Just because we could play music and like solve a math equation, does that really make us more special? Or can we just play music and, do a math equation? Like, that's just things we can do. It doesn't make us like any better than any other beings on the planet or interdimensionally. So.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us nicely onto the second big question of what matters morally. And it's hard to separate the topics, right? And you've already talked about compassion and empathy and anthropocentrism and going beyond that. But again, it'd be interesting to wind the clock back and understand your journey through thinking about morality. You've touched on some of it. Partly, what's the basis for your morality? What defines what things are good and bad in your ethics? But also when you were thinking about this question of moral scope, which entities matter? Because for many people, it's starting out with family and then thinking more broadly and thinking about our tribe or our group, and then thinking, oh, maybe all humans matter, and then critically going beyond that and thinking about non-humans. But to tie the topics together, one of the challenges I find, again, with some people who take maybe a very spiritual approach, they will have this sense that they go almost too far the other way, in my view, because they say, look, we are all one, we are all connected in a web of existence, as part of that cycle, patterns happen, cycles continue, life eats life, and we as humans need to play our part in that cycle. And nature is a good thing, and predation is part of nature. So I'll have a bacon sandwich. So I don't want to lead you into too far, but that's one of the challenges I sometimes see with the spiritual worldview. Is it's almost so expansive, everything matters, that then nothing really matters because everything's the same. So in that framework, and again, I should let you talk, but yeah, how do you find your way through that question of working out what matters and why?
Oh, first of all, I'm gonna have to say that what you just said, that is the most irritating mentality to me because as somebody, I'm really into advocacy. So whenever I see somebody who's like really into all the isms, like, yes, social justice completely, and then at the local level in their own lifestyle, they do nothing to foster change, that irritates me beyond belief because that means you're doing it for show. Just being, go on Instagram and just take pictures then if it's like that. You know what I mean? If you don't want change, don't act like you want change. Because change comes and it comes from your own lifestyle and obviously encouraging big business and politicians. So I'll stop there because like that really makes me angry. But I would say when it comes to my moral compass, it's always been something very personal and intuitive for me because I remember even as a child, I was never really a child. This sounds really weird, but I was just always an adult. Like I feel like
born
even
old.
thinking, yeah, I was just always old. I'm such an old soul, and that sounds really like cliche, but realistically, I just feel like I've walked this earth thousands of times before, if that makes sense. And that will probably never make sense to anybody because we can't really measure that, But at the same time, though, I feel like even as a child, my moral compass was very set because my parents being very religious and my mom being a Southerner, they wanted me to be a certain type of way, and I always rebelled against that. They always wanted me to be kind of, I don't want to put my parents on blast right now, but realistically, my parents are not the most accepting of people who are queer, trans, gender non-conforming. And that was something that they tried to hammer into my head as a child. Like my parents always wanted me to like be oppressive, just like, what a lot of Christians believe. Like they were very okay with giving me their mentality, even to this day, on how they feel about that. And I can't hear it because it's not uplifting and it's not liberating for people. So I don't want to hear it. But even with my parents being that way and believing very solely in the conservative values of what people believe in the Christian church, I always knew that I had that type of compassion within. I lived in an area where everybody was from a different country. Everyone was, Black and brown. We had varying, financial, like socioeconomic statuses around us. So I was raised around people who were poor. I don't want to say upper middle class because that did not happen, but people were in different class, hierarchies.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, and my mom being a teacher, she was a teacher for children with special needs. She's been retired from that. And my dad being a custodian, all those things, my next door neighbor being a gay man, all my neighbors not knowing really how to speak English, all those things kind of led up to me being more compassionate towards people's struggles. Because I realized that even though I didn't, my child was fine, but being a little Black girl in the US, it's not easy growing up. But even outside of that, I was able to like observe other people's, I would say, struggles or challenges based on like what they look like, their education, whatever, or their career. I saw that people really are just people. Everyone just wants to have their needs met. Everyone just wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be heard. Everyone is just on autopilot because we feel like all we are our titles. We don't, especially when you're on a level, especially with a lot of Black people, like we're at a point where we have no choice but to just survive. And we're just so tired because generations and generations of people being clear that they don't care and blah, blah, blah. You just run out of energy and you're like, whatever, I'm just going to play the game because clearly no one respects me when I'm like not playing the game. People don't respect me when I play the game. I might as well just be on the straight and narrow because people might respect me more.
Just get through the day.
Exactly. Just get through the day. So in just feeling that as a young person, I was like, you know what? I want to be more kind towards people. I want people to feel good about themselves. I want people who are abused to not feel that it's their fault. And then when it came to veganism, it was like,
so I guess that was the break point, right? Because so it felt like you went to a fairly sort of universal compassion for humans, right? Regardless of race, sex, gender, background, whatever, right? We're all human quite early. What was the step with non-humans? What was the journey?
I think it really was in doing my research, because when I first started going into veganism, I was going on a health kick, because everyone does that, and I thought it was going to help me lose weight and blah blah. But in doing my research about it, because I'm a researcher, before I jump into a lifestyle change, I do a lot of research on it. In that, I realized that I don't need to eat this, and what we do to animals, non-human animals, are awful. Like, I didn't even need to really see earthlings. Everything I read from Google searches, it was like, why are people doing this? This is horrible. So it was kind of at that moment, before I went into animal rights or whatever, I was vegan for probably about a year. So I would say the first year, I didn't necessarily have that total compassion for non-human animals. It was still me being vegan for, I would say, kind of food justice reasons, Black community reasons.
Yeah.
But after a year of being around other vegans and doing things in Baltimore City, I'm doing advocacy work in Baltimore City, I was like, okay, not only is it really messed up what we do to animals, it is not fair to non-human animals. It is not, they deserve to live their lives in completion, doing what they do. It doesn't matter how we think that they taste or how we think that they serve us. This is awful. So that came together, and I feel like it made my empathy swell a little bit more, because I was able to put an emotion behind what I saw that we were doing towards non-human animals, rather than being desensitized, like a lot of people in the West are. And I'm very into horror, so I feel like sometimes I can be desensitized to that type of violence. But not only knowing that the horror exists, but that it's very, very real for non-human animals, I was like, no, I can't do this. And it made me really remember that you don't have to necessarily be grieving to matter. You don't have to, once again, solve a puzzle to matter. You don't have to write a symphony to matter. We all deserve resources, life, happiness, joy, all those types of things. So once the non-human animals came to play, that's when I was like, I'm all total liberation. Total liberation. I want no oppression for anybody. I want no hierarchies. I want people to just not suffer needlessly, so people can remain wealthy. And unfortunately, we all deal with that type of ism.
Yeah.
So I would say my moral compass is total liberation. I'm sick of seeing people starve. I'm sick of seeing non-human animals being slaughtered needlessly for people's entertainment and consumption. It's all too much. So total liberation.
Yeah, thank you. And it's such a strange switch to make, because it's so obvious when we're talking about other humans, right? It's intuitive and obvious that the essence of nearly all human ethics is empathy and compassion, and just imagining what it would be like to be the other. And I like the way you described it as being a very personal thing. You start from I say I don't like suffering. I'm pretty sure you don't like suffering too. And morality is just deciding to care about that. I mean, it's almost that simple. And you do that in one sense for other humans, and it's sort of understandable why, right? Because we can, all I see here is the pixels on the screen, but I'm pretty confident you're human. I'm pretty confident we share a common evolutionary past. We behave and communicate in similar ways that makes me guess that you probably have an internal experience. If I put you in an fMRI scanner, I probably see similar sort of stuff going on, right? So I've got a good confidence.
Yes.
I'll give you a 99.7% chance that you're sentient, right? But it's that simple. And it is a little bit tough with non-human animals, because they are different from us, they're different species. But again, on all of those different types of evidence, the evidence is there, right? We share a common evolutionary history and evolutionary context. We have, strong overlap in terms of the information processing architecture and the neuroanatomy we have. We have strong behavior and communications. Animals aren't voiceless at all, right? And we just, they have a different sort of voice that we choose to ignore most of the time. But switching across that species boundary and then thinking, okay, they are sentient, they have experiences, they can suffer, they have interests, they have needs, and then caring about that is like a light going on. And it's sort of so obvious once you've done it. It's hard to understand how you didn't think that way. And that's part of the challenge of, I guess, being vegan and being animal advocates, is that in a way it almost makes it harder for us to communicate with people for whom that light hasn't gone on, because a chasm has sort of opened up between us. But that's the part of the challenge.
That's so true. And the thing is, I have to remember that not everyone has not even the same experience as me, the same mindset as me, or just empathy. I feel like empathy is something that people need to practice. I think empathy is on a spectrum as well. I think not everyone experiences empathy at the same way. So I was just happened to be born with a lot of empathy. There are people who are more apathetic naturally, and I'll never be able to explain that. I'll never know why. So I have to also remember that even though I really want to hammer in my own ideology to people and just be like, come on, care, people, please care. And that was kind of my advocacy in the beginning of my vegan journey, my advocacy journey. But yeah, that's something that, even though it makes me sad, I have to remember that not everyone experiences empathy in the same way. So it makes sense why not a lot of people are that compassionate. It still sucks, though, I will say.
Yeah. And you touched on another, often really sensitive topic, which is how do we think about the links or the differences between different types of oppression, particularly those that affect, our fellow humans and those that affect across species. And you talked about total liberation, and you talked about being against all forms of oppression. And intuitively, that's the way I feel as well. It's right. Why can't we just be against all of these artificial discriminations? Why can't we be against all forms of oppression? But one that can sound a little bit naive and simplistic. And also people sometimes worry that, by just taking a generic approach like that, which I still think is well-founded, there's a risk you sort of erase some of the critical differences in between different types of oppression, different histories, different groups' experiences. And I don't think we have to do that. I think we can be both against all types of oppression and recognize the often radical differences in between different types of oppressions and different experiences. But how do you think about, linking different sets of experiences and whether we should do that and how we should do that?
Let's see if I answer this correctly, because education really starts with awareness. And of course, making people aware of a certain situation, it could help. It could really help. But to me, it's just so hard to say. At this stage in the world and in my advocacy journey, I would have to say I don't know, because we always want to feel like we have an answer. We want to have an answer. It feels great, you know what I mean? But I have absolutely no answer. I just feel like as long as I am just continuing to do what I do, I continue to make it known. And if you agree with me along the way, great. If you don't, boo-hoo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that to answer your question, if that's answering your question, I've just come to a place in my advocacy where I am not trying to convince anybody of anything at this point. Like, I'm here to offer you the information, especially through AVS, Afro-Vegan Society. We're just here to offer you the information. And when you're ready, here it is. Because we don't want to be anything into your skull because I'm somebody who's very defiant. And I'm assuming that people can be like that. Like, if you try to tell me about myself, or you try to tell me that I'm wrong about something that I'm, very harshly believe in, I understand. Well, everyone can be like that. But if you're trying to tell me that I'm weird or immoral for being vegan, we're gonna have a conversation, because I believe so heavily in this. How can you tell me that? But at the same time, though, I'm just not here to convince anybody. I'm not going to convince you that my experience as a Black person is draining, because no one will ever know unless they experience it. I can't tell you how it's like to be raised where I didn't have all my financial needs met. You won't know them until you experience it. And a lot of people just don't care. And that's something that I had to come to. People don't really care if it's not happening to them, especially in the US. We're very out of sight, out of mind. Our attention span is very short, so we move on to the next issue, the next hot topic of the day. So,
yeah, it's tough.
If I'm answering your question correctly, I don't have a true answer. That's something that I really do want to dig deep and figure out how I can not make people understand, because that to me that comes from like an egotistical standpoint. Like, I just want to make you understand,
Yeah.
please. It's more than that. I just want people to understand that, like, even if you're not suffering, it doesn't feel good to suffer just because people have, like, politicians have biases towards you. Like, it doesn't feel good. So it's, if people cared, if their empathy levels are there, here's the information. But if not, hopefully you'll see one day.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that comes on to the final difficult question about how can we make the future a better world. And this is tough, right? And there are so many battles even within different advocacy movements about how to do this, right? So some people will focus on individual versus systemic change versus both. Others will have a very different style of advocacy. Some will preach and moralize and shame, which is my instinct, because when you learn about the obvious horrors that we're doing needlessly, it's sort of, that's where you go, right? That's emotionally where you go. And then others will point out that, okay, that doesn't persuade many people. They need to be on a journey. We need to find an incremental approach. We need to make it easy for people to do the right thing. So there's all of those different debates and discussions about how we can drive change productively. And there's a second challenge, which is there's no one size fits all, because there are so many different cultures and groups and countries around the world and different dynamics in different situations that, what's going to drive change effectively in one place is radically different from another. And you've talked already a little bit about your philosophy there, which is almost, I quite like it, which is, look, I'm not responsible for you. I can't make you change, but I'm also not going to patronize you by hiding and being quiet and deferring when you tell me to be quiet. I'm going to lay out the information. I'm going to tell you the answers. I'm going to tell you how I think, and let's see how we go. Beyond that, have you what else do you think about, a theory of change or how to drive change in general? And if you've already answered that question personally, how does AfroVegan Society play into that? And, I guess what are you and that organization trying to achieve, and how?
You know what? I would probably say, I'll say this from the AVS standpoint and then maybe trail on.
Yeah.
I think that what we do as AVS, we really just want it to be entertaining. I'm not saying that we think that activism can be boring or anything like that, but like, activism is sad. You know what I mean? Oppression is sad. And when we I feel like we're successful in what we do in offering that type of information, because I'm not saying we're trying to make oppression fun, you know what I mean? Oh yes, we're not trying to do that, but it's more like giving people the actual facts, the statistics, the goings on, the information of something, and we're trying to package it into something that is listenable, shareable, and not sadable. You know what I mean? Something that will make you feel like you're leaving this event, because we do a lot of events, which we'll probably talk about in a second, but we have a lot of free events, resources, things on our website, recipes, we have YouTube videos. I don't want to say we want to make oppression sound entertaining, is that we want to talk about these issues, like climate change included, food just included, without depressing people. Like, I feel like we're merely telling you without a necessary tone. We're giving you that information. We're trying to be as neutral as possible, maybe even more uplifting than not. And it is up to you what you want to do with that information. And if you had a good time, if you had fun, come back and we can tell you some more stuff. So I feel like that will probably be more of my approach, is just that, give people the information, not like with a spoonful of sugar, but it's just more like, say it in a way that's neutral, so it doesn't seem like the world is ending and that the only thing that can be done is this person. You know what I mean? It kind of just gives you a lot of pressure. So yeah, we just doing things in a very uplifting, community-based, engaging way. Rather than reminding people of the world's ills, because we know that we can all see that and we're all sad from it. And for me personally, I would say it's a similar way. I like to talk about, on my own personal thing, I like to talk about social justice, blah, blah, spirituality, in a way that doesn't seem too overwhelming or pressured, or that individual is the problem. Because we want to remember that we got to this place, of course, by individuals, whatever. but there are people in higher places that got us to this place on purpose. So it's more like not blaming people, coming from a place of like understanding, not wanting to get riled up and swell up in the chest just because they don't agree with us. Look, there's a lot of people who don't agree with me, but we're not going to waste our time trying to argue with somebody when really that argument is probably doing more harm than good, because I'm not trying to force you to believe in this. I want you to come to this conclusion on your own. So I would say it would be from offering the information in a very kind way, even though these systems are not kind.
Yeah, I like it, and I think you can. It sounds like you've got a great balance, because you're not hiding the negatives. You're being completely clear. You're being neutral. You're being direct. You're not patronizing people by dancing around that stuff. But as well as, instead of wallowing in that and almost adopting a sort of fatalistic, how horrible is this? We might as well give up mindset. You're looking at the opportunity of fixing these things, right? Even if we're making small changes ourselves, right? People talk about some types of advocacy as if it's a sacrifice and we have to feel the pain of making these changes. And often it can be a joy. It can be, as you described, freeing. It can be, an amazing opportunity to make things better. And fun can come along with that as well, right? I do know people who, instead of going, I'm going to have to give up one of my favorite foodstuffs and try something I don't like, instead it can be, here's this, my favorite dish. How can I veganize this? What's the challenge here? And it can be fun as you go on the journey as well. So I love that approach. It's direct and it's frank about the negatives, but let's not wallow on that. Let's think about the opportunities and try and have a bit of sort of uplift and positivity there as well. Yeah, and I think that helps too with the tribalism problem we talked about before, because it's a it infects almost every topic, but it certainly does with veganism and animal advocacy, of course, right? And we've all had those conversations where someone almost implies that they're going to eat more meat because they find vegans annoying, and you're like, well, how is me being annoying relevant to the ethical question? Right. Whereas again, if we can, without dancing around the topic and without patronizing people and without hiding the problem, if we can seem sort of normal, sort of fun, sort of like okay people who are trying to do good in the world, and more people want to maybe join in with us, then maybe that can help too. So
exactly. And on top of that, like, I've been vegan for 8.5 years, and Brenda Sanders, our awesome executive director, she's been vegan for either, if not almost 20 years, then over 20 years.
Wow.
So and everyone else on the AVS team has been vegan for a long time. So we've all had our time to get out those jollies of wanting to shame people and like judge people and all those types of things. We had a long time. We're just so over it because we understand the stigma that people have towards vegans. I do our social media, so I see, especially
you're on the front
Twitter,
line.
Oh, Jamie. Oh my God, it's horrible. I love my job. I'm not saying that like social media is the thing that's scary, not my job. But like on Twitter, especially, people hate vegans. And I see why they hate vegans, not like me understanding why, but I see like literally physically why the arguments that they have. And it really all comes down to the fact that they think we're annoying. Yeah. That's all it comes down to. They make fun of our food, they make fun of our ethics, but really what they're trying to say is y'all are annoying. And so we don't want to, and everyone's advocacy is valid, you know what I mean? As long as you're not hurting anybody or being violent, do you. However, we realize that approach, being very preachy and things like that, even though we really are, like really deep down, I'm very preachy. I just won't, because I know that is not the right way, because I'm not trying to do this, once again, or AVS, we're not trying to do this solely for our ego or solely to just get millions of followers. We're trying to do this to literally eventually slowly zap out mass production of non-human animals. We understand also, as what you were saying before, that kind of can seem naive, because realistically, can we really stop oppression? Can people really stop oppression? That comes back to that naturalist mentality that I also have, because spiritual Jamila is like, oh yes, everybody will see the light and all that type of stuff. But then naturalist Jamila is like, okay, look, oppression has been here since the dawn of time. What can I do by the time I'm like 120, because I know I'm going to live a long time? What can I do, or my community can do, to at least lessen the impact of these things, rather than our goal will always be to for people to not suffer in general. But we realized that, okay, am I really going to convince this politician to not want to put this tax break because of blah, blah, and voting rights and everything that's happening in the US, which is just a lot. So with that realization, yeah, we have no choice but to just offer the information in a very digestible way.
Yeah. And I think the only two things I'd add to that, which is there's this sense that if some people think that if you can't be perfect, there's no point trying. And I think that's totally crazy because perfection is not achievable, right? There is no such thing, really. Even the purest vegan doesn't have a harm and killing free lifestyle, right? So this idea of if I can't be perfect, let's not try is just nuts and often used as an excuse. So let's not pretend we can be perfect. But there's also a danger that if we do take the sort of incremental journey type approach, and it's like little steps here and there, and we forget the ethics, that we might end up in a dead end somewhere. So I think it's important, as you said, to always keep that moral drive, that ethics. That's not necessarily, we're not preaching every day, we're not hectoring people, but that's the motivation, right? That's the outcome we're really trying to achieve. That's what's driving, the incremental steps we're taking in the campaigning we're doing. So that, the ethics is still at the core there, the engine that's pushing everything forward. So.
Absolutely. And the passion behind it, because some people just, once again, like, if you really are about the not oppression life, total liberation life, be passionate about it, because like people aren't going to believe you. You know what I mean? We really, at this day and age, we really do need to convince people why it's important to be compassionate. And I'm not being ableist in that sense, because I know not everyone can, once again, experience empathy in the same way.
Yeah.
However, it is just very important that we, I don't want to say teach people to care, but be passionate about, have some passion behind our words with this, because how else will we reach people? You know what I mean? How else will we reach people? We can't just give you a statistic and then leave you on your way. Like, what else do we know? What else can we tug on your heartstrings with to let you know that these situations are like not only like horrible, but they're very, very real for all beings.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And often not that hard to fix, right? Many of the things we're talking about, the technical solutions are pretty much already there. It's often just a question of individual will or political will, or a cultural shift or a social norm shifting. We humans are the solution and the problem, really.
Oh yes.
Well, that's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you. I know I've got to let you go soon. What's the best way of, I guess, following your work as Soulful, Veganista and AfroVegan Society? And do you want to put in a little plug for NavCon 2021? Because if I can get this out quickly enough, we might be able to persuade a couple of people from my tiny audience to sign up in time for next weekend.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll say this first. Yes, I am the Soulful Veganista. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, kind of. And I'm also on YouTube. I have a Patreon as well. So yep, it's just the Soulful Veganista. So check me out. But also, I'm also the marketing director for AfroVegan Society. So you can check us out on all socials. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn. There's one thing that we have, and I'm totally forgetting it, but we also have our website, AfroVeganSociety.org. And in coming to that, we are having our National AfroVegan virtual conference, virtual summit, coming up next Saturday at November 13th from 12 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to have like great speakers, cooking demos, information sessions, panels, all the great things to basically give people the information that we would like them to know, but giving them homework as well so they can take it home with them, learn more, get more in contact with their communities, reach out to different communities, and figure out what they can do to alleviate the symptoms of oppression in their area, and just to learn more about climate change on a global scale. So you can definitely sign up for the free event. That is for everybody. I understand that we are AfroVegan Society and this is an AfroVegan conference. That's just the name of the conference. We want this to be for everybody because we believe everyone of all background, lifestyle, preference, but whatever, can benefit from this information. So you can sign up for free at AfroVeganSociety.org/events. Once again, AfroVeganSociety.org/events. And we can't wait to see you there.
Wonderful. Thank you. I want to include all the links in the show notes too, as well, so people can click through. Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Your passion shines through. Thank you so much for being part of Sentientist Conversations, Jamila.
Of course. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Stay in touch.
Steph.